Stewart F. Brown, JPMP, Honorable Minister Scott, Minister of Telecommunications and E-commerce, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another 2010 event honoring Bermuda's emancipation. Tonight promises to be a night filled with stimulation and inspiration. We will invite our Honorable Premier to provide us with some opening remarks. Premier Brown.
It has been said by some that I am always talking about race. So I was asked to give remarks about emancipation. And I said, now surely you can understand if I talk about race. Today, we gather to reflect and recognize the liberation almost 200 years ago of the men, women, and children victimized by the most evil, vicious, and despicable system of oppression ever devised by man. In slavery times, slaves who were rebellious, disrespectful, and bold would often be whipped into submission, maimed, disfigured, or even killed in front of other slaves. This would send a message to the black man and black woman so that they would know what the slave master called their place. And so many of us have learned to whisper when we should be outspoken, smile and joke when we should be angry, and self-medicate when we are in pain. We learn that intelligence, confidence, and self-respect were characteristics to be feared and despised rather than admired. Along with the physical brutality and intimidation, the slave masters would highlight and exacerbate differences among the slaves using fear, distrust, and envy as a means of maintaining dominance. Despite this, slavery eventually formally came to an end. With hope, optimism, and faith, the former slaves emerged in a society that continued to deny their humanity, restricted their potential, and hindered their progression. These newly freed men and women entered a world where, through no fault of their own, they had to make do with less, where they would have to work twice as hard to be half as successful as their Caucasian countrymen, and a world that continued to be filled with pitfalls, obstacles, and peril. As the chains fell from the arms and legs of our courageous forefathers, new chains and a new form of bondage began to seize our people. As victims of oppression, we had grown to hate and doubt ourselves. The divisions highlighted and played upon by the slave master remained in place long after we had been freed from slavery and continue to impact upon our society today. Sometimes we look at the behavior of black people anywhere on the planet and wonder why it seems so strange, so self-destructive. There's a history to all of that. The divisions highlighted and played upon by the master remained in place long after we had been freed from slavery and continue to impact on us today. I believe that to fix a problem, you first have to face or come to terms with the problem. And while many people may find what I say next to be harsh, our problems run deep and require strong medicine. The message I deliver today comes from the heart and out of deep and passionate love for our people. The message I deliver today comes from an unswerving desire to see our people finally reach the lofty heights of our collective potential. While slavery was abolished as an institution, slavery has never been abolished from some of our thought processes. Too many of us continue to possess self-hate rather than self-esteem. Too many of us continue to elevate ignorance over intellect. Too many of us are holding ourselves back from our full potential. Our government introduced free daycare for needy families. But how many of us are saving the money that would have been spent on daycare and are putting it towards our children's future education, towards owning a home, or perhaps towards starting a business? Our government introduced free education at the Bermuda College. But how many of us are taking advantage of that free education to acquire the skills and knowledge to advance towards positions of leadership in our own economy? If we don't take advantage, mark my word, if we don't take advantage of these opportunities, we will not only be spectators in our own country, but we will be moaning and groaning in 2050 just as we are today. Our government has expanded the number of affordable housing units in Bermuda. But how many of us have refused the help of this government because the housing wasn't the size we want or the location that is convenient? And you may think I'm just saying that. That's the Premier just being extreme again. Let me tell you a story. When the Honorable Nelson Bascom was Minister responsible for housing, I had a constituent of mine in Warwick who used to call me every weekend complaining that she had not gotten decent housing, asking me if I could please help. I went and met with the minister in his office, on the golf course, wherever I could find him. I said, Nelson, we've got to find a house for this lady. 6 months went by. He called me one morning. He said, Doc, I got something. I said, what? He said, I got a house for that lady that you talked about. I said, really? And he went on to tell me that it was a lovely 3-bedroom house, not too far from the water, very spacious, clean, and relatively new. So in my excitement, I told him I had to go so I could call the lady. I called her up. I said, I have great news for you. She said, you found me a house? I said, yes. 5 minutes later, she was off the phone, disappointed, and rejected the house because it was in St. David's. We are in danger of creating a lazy, ungrateful, entitled generation, more suited to the halls of prison than the halls of power. A progressive, compassionate government can never take the place of a progressive and aggressive people who hunger to achieve leadership and success in their own country. The late, great Robert Nesta Marley once sang, "Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our mind." We can continue to be afraid of speaking out. We can continue to spend our lives living on our knees rather than standing on our feet. We can continue to fail to capitalize on the opportunities available to us. We can continue to make excuses for our own lack of effort and personal failings. Or we can emancipate ourselves from the abuse of drugs and alcohol. We can emancipate ourselves from violence against our brothers and sisters. Emancipate ourselves from fear and self-hatred. Emancipate ourselves from rumor, suspicion, and a crabs in the bucket mentality. I was telling somebody today, here I am, having served 4 years as Premier, getting ready to walk out the door, and I'll bet you if you asked 100 Bermudians the question, many of them would say, Dr. Brown's got cedar beams in his house. Because you believe what you're told. emancipate ourselves so that our men can stand as men, our women stand as women, and have our self-respect become so pronounced that the respect of others is only inevitable. It is time for us to wake up to the reality of our humanity, our own worth, and our noble heritage. It is time for us to put aside all those things that contribute nothing positive to our country and our people. If we choose to emancipate ourselves, I can think of no greater tribute to the sacrifice, struggle, and suffering of our ancestors. As we enjoy our cup match, let us never forget the silent suffering of our ancestors. Never forget the evil that was perpetrated against our people for hundreds of years and the injustice that we have suffered. But let us not forget the role we each have to play in moving our people forward. Thank you.
To my immediate left, we have Miss Victoria Pearman, who is an attorney, a well-respected defense lawyer, a human rights activist, and a former senator for the Progressive Liberal Party. Welcome, Ms. Pearman. In the middle, we have Dr. Llewellyn Simmons, Senior Education Officer in the Department of Education. He's actually the Director of Academics. Dr. Simmons is a former professor at the University of Dayton, Ohio. He's published numerous articles and has been very involved in the upliftment of our people. Welcome, Dr. Simmons. And of course, to my furthest left over there, the brother's got a new look. Dr. Keto Swan, who's currently a professor at Howard University. He has recently published, and I quote from here, Black Power in Bermuda, The Struggle for Decolonization. You have to get it. Brown & Company has it. You can order it. The hardback will be coming soon. But Dr. Swan is a renowned scholar. We all know him, and we want to welcome the panel. The format for this evening. Each panelist will give a 5 or 10 minutes discourse on the showing of the film, and then we will go into a Q&A, and we'd ask you, the audience, to participate and engage in the discussion. With that said, let's move forward and ask Ms. Pearman to give her analysis of 500 years later. Ms. Pearman.
Good evening, everyone. It's a bit dark out there. I can't see who's out there, but please don't tell my doctor you saw me here tonight. I was a few minutes late, so I'm not really sure how much I missed, but as I was sitting there, I was grappling with all sorts of emotions. I couldn't help but think about Dr. Hudson. She was a reoccurring theme. And as I got out and went out into the lobby, I bumped into her, and so I was gratified that she was here. But even though it was said in different languages, and there were different pictures and from different perspectives, the British perspective, the Caribbean perspective, the American perspective, I couldn't help but think that isn't that really what she's been trying to tell us now for, well, I don't want to date her, but so many years? And isn't it really the case that until maybe 10, 15 years ago, we didn't even acknowledge that we had race issues in Bermuda? And so I'm gratified that the movie was shown this evening at this very historic time in our cultural calendar. I guess I'm even more gratified that so many people actually came out to see it, and surprised that even though they've already served food, so many people have stayed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be naughty. One of the challenges always in this area, I believe, is to look on the one hand at the future and hope and the way forward without getting bogged down in frustration about how far we need to go. That's always a challenge for me. It's wonderful at the end to see the young students talking about what they'd like to be and saying all sorts of wonderful affirmations, and that's what we all want. That's what we want for I know we're looking global, but that's what I, as a nationalist, want for my little small rock. I want young Bermudians who have managed to go some distance away from this inferiority complex that we all carry. I want us not to be amazed when Bermudian people do amazing things. I want us never to doubt that we are anything but full-fledged human beings. That sounds really simple. Wow. Okay, my doctor's not out there, thanks. That sounds really simple, but in this society, it's quite radical. I think it was Corin Smith who gave one of these public talks once, and he used a very real image that stayed with me, probably because I'm so afraid of lizards. He talked about being a young boy catching lizards on the grass, the noose that, I don't know if anybody still does that. Everybody's playing PlayStation nowadays, but they used to catch those lizards. I hated it because they used to chase me and I couldn't run. But he told the story about keeping the lizard there for, all day, and then finally feeling merciful and deciding that he was going to let it out of its noose. But the poor lizard, having been in that state all day, just sat there. And he'd say, okay, well, you're free now, shoo, go. And the lizard just gave up and was, nothing was holding him or it, nothing was tethering it except itself and its mind and its belief that it now could not run free anymore. So what does that have to do with us? Well, one of the things I think it has to do with us is that we pay lip service on one level about what a great and aged people we are. Even though Bermudians, as a general rule, don't talk about their Africanness, there is a sense in us here that for the majority of the peoples in this island, this is from whence we came. And there's a certain pride about it too. I think the word I heard on the movie was there's a duality. There's nobody here who can't help but feel something when the Gumbays kick up. Can't help that. You can't help it. You could have went to Oxford and Cambridge and Salters and BHS and never lived in, with the so-called people that dance the Gumbays, but you feel that. I don't know what it's called. There are all sorts of sporty names for it, I suppose. But then, at the same time, there's a feeling of absolute dire hopelessness when we hear that there's been another shooting. And let's be honest, the people who are doing the shooting and the people who are the victims of the shooting are people of African descent as well. So there's a confusion about how these people who are of greatness find ourselves in this morass. I've heard education thrown around, education. I'm not really sure I know what that means, because the same way that we uphold education, there are the haunting words that I think Bob Marley's saying, don't let them school you. Don't let them school you. What does that mean? Education with a capital E, I suppose, is what we're after. We want to create a nation of self-directed learning. Yes, I have nothing against the public education system or the private system. Some of you will know that I spoke for education in the Senate for a short period of time. But it's bigger than a curriculum. It's bigger than, well, do you know this skill set and that? We are now in the age of knowledge, and even a technological retarded person like me can poke around on a computer and get answers to things. You can bump into knowledge that you weren't even looking for. You're looking for one thing and something else pops up that's incredible. So I guess I'm at the stage now where I'm thinking there cannot for much longer be any excuse for not knowing better and doing better. They can't really, Is it really now? In the old days, that we'd say, well, make sure you make your child read a book. Still important, but in this information age, you can't walk 5 steps without knowing something. It's almost like a conscious effort not to know. I don't know. I mean, I guess, I guess I'm rattling on a little bit, but I'm trying to put where we are right now in Bermuda. I mean, let's be honest. All of us have noticed that the last rash of shootings have been in the West End. And the most significant holiday in our cultural calendar is going to happen in the West End in a couple of days. And let's be honest, there's not one of us that hasn't thought about, is this going to be safe, and is it going to be okay, and what's going to happen? That's what we're thinking at the same time that we're approaching, the festivities and, soaking our peas. And I'm trying to fit where that stands with what I just saw on the screen. Is there anything in that that helps us to deal with where we are now? I'm not 100% certain about that, but what I do know is that people who know their value and know their worth are in a better position of transmitting that to young people who know their value and who know their worth. And I'm not 100% sure that those of us who are charged with this responsibility are as secure or as knowledgeable or as discontented as we need to be in order to get that message across. So insofar as this movie helps with that dialogue, I support it. But I think we have to also remember, must be 10 minutes now, Tank. You got to watch me, I talk for a living. Okay. What we have to also remember is that most of what I saw on the movie was from the perspective of people who are minorities. Now, is that significant? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. We're not a minority in Bermuda. And we kind of need to remind ourselves of that. We may feel like a minority when we go to the bank to get a loan, or to go buy a house, or, all of those things. We may feel like a minority, but we're not supposed to be thinking like a minority. We're supposed to be thinking as powerful people who are not first supposed to try and hold the masses off them. It's like when we celebrate Black History Month in February. I don't know why we do that. Shouldn't we be celebrating that every day? Why do we have to wait until February? I can understand the Americans. That's all they get. So, I would like for us to be anything but the lizard. I would like for us to be as far removed as possible from people who are emancipated in theory, but who feel a sense of powerlessness, who aren't, even though, we make a lot of noise on the outside, who inside aren't feeling that secure or strong about who they are as a people. I think the movie is wonderful. There's food for thought, but we've got to go one step back. We have to remember, as I think a few of the speakers said towards the end, and I see my friend Wedderburn, thank you. He was the one who first delivered this phrase to me. We are an aged people. We didn't just start with slavery. We were, I know the curriculum doesn't help us very much with that, but, we are the inventors of sciences. We are the inventors of mathematics. Would our children be going around blowing each other up if they knew that? I'm not sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Finley. Dr. Simmons?
Good evening, everyone. Dr. Tangy, you really have to keep me disciplined, right? At a good time. So, because this is something that's very deep and close to me. You know, for the purpose of this exercise, in viewing the film, I mean, I've seen this film about 6, 7 times, and I viewed the film through probably 3 different lenses for the purpose of this forum. And I did it because if the children, especially in the audience, and as given that I'm an educator and I focus pretty much in a critical mindset about what I view, it's important that when we view anything or listen to anything, that we interpret it or we process it analytically, interpretively, and normatively. And that's how I viewed this film. And to view it analytically, that means I had to view the film and break down the components of the film. What is this film telling me? And like any text, like any music, like any visual, the author, the artist is attempting to convince you of something. And this was no different. And the beautiful thing about this, in this film, there were multiple arguments being framed. Multiple arguments. And I chose just to focus on 2, which are really obvious ones to us. And the major argument of the film is that people of African descent, subjugated by enslavement, arrived to the West, were chained and shackled, treated less than human, 200 million lost in the Great Ma'afa, the African Holocaust, by Europeans. That was the major argument. Evidence shown, you saw the graphic illustrations of people of African descent being mutilated, hanged, pierced, thrown overboard, cargo on ships stacked up. That is the major argument of the film. But it had a secondary argument. 500 years later, people of African descent continue to wrestle with and question, who are we? And this is the 21st century. We're probably the only people in terms of African descent, black people, still questioning who we are. And probably no people do it more than in this country. We still question what is a Bermudian. So we're no different. And that is a connection to the film. We still question in Bermuda, what is a Bermudian? The film clearly, captures the labels, the black, the Caribbean, the Afro-Caribbean, the African-American, the colored, the niggardly, the nigger, lawyers, scientists, engineers. But even out of that came queens and kings. That's before the enslavement. And it was getting at what Ms. Perrin was talking about. We have a rich legacy. And in the film, they use those subtitles to, again, reinforce our purpose, legacy, education, the role of culture, implications of racism rooted in white supremacy, generations, implications of music, reparations, Sankofa, looking back. These are strong subtitles that are used by those who do not want you to know who you are as the new attack on African history. That gets us into playing the blame game as an assignment. And you heard Molefi Asante Karenga speaking to that. When you move into the interpretive reading of the film, you have to place it in a historical and a cultural context. And running through the film, of course, there's the social, there's the educational context of the film. But it's really playing and addressing the historical, the past, the present, and the future. Culture runs all through it, still having us question, who are we? And it had me looking at the ancestors, and you heard them address them. We have all our solutions before us. Asa Hilliard wasn't addressed in the film, but He addressed this issue, Dr. Asa Hilliard addressed this in the year 2000, prior to his passing. And he spoke about 12 challenges for African people, no matter where they are on the planet. No matter where they are on the planet, these 12 challenges, all people of African descent suffer or are having to address these particular issues. He says, we are unconscious with no global view of African people, and you heard that in the film, and no global view of successful ethnic groups. We experience ourselves as local people in a global world. That's really Bermudian. Some of us experience ourselves only as individuals without any connection even to a local African community. And just translate that in the context of your own communities. We have acute amnesia with no valid memories or awareness of ourselves as a historical people, evolving through time and spreading throughout the world. We are episodic in our experience of ourselves. We are disintegrating as a people and disorganized. We have lost our solidarity. Many of us feel no bond of identity with our people. 4, and he places great emphasis on this one. We are not raising our own children. We have no systematic socialization structures for the masses of our children. They are raising themselves, or they are being raised by others outside of themselves. We have forfeited one of the most vital functions of a people, the responsibility for intergenerational cultural transmission. If you went back to the origin of Cup Match had that as a principle, given that you brought it up. That was a principle of Cup Match, that it be an intergenerational cultural transmission between the elders and the young. We have growing loss of independent faith communities, becoming more subordinate in institutions that we do not control. We have no long-range strategic goals, plans, and mobilization. We do have an adequate comprehension of wealth production and accumulation, but few of us make wealth. We do not have adequate comprehension of how to nurture health and prevent illness. We die early, especially the men. We do not have an adequate African-centered higher education. We do not have sufficient cultural centers, movements, monuments, celebrations to highlight important experiences. We have no regular independent communication capabilities such as serious national and international periodicals. We don't write. And sitting next to me is a brother who's an inspiration. And there are others in the audience who write as a culture. Then there's the normative. 500 years later, we are still addressing these issues in the 21st century. Bobby Wright addressed this as menticide. Right now, the fight is really for our children's minds, because many of our adults have lost theirs. But it's going to require a collective consciousness on the adults' half to rescue our children. When we place this in the context of the 2 days that we have coming, I'm just going to say this normatively. You know, when we look at anything normatively, we are looking at it through a moral and ethical lens. And when you go to Cup Match, and I mean, for me, an exercise of Cup Match is always to study the symbols. And I've been studying them for the past 10 years. And I'll say this, when the Friendly Society started, Cup Match was a shared, collaborative, collective, cooperative, economic family experience, bringing families together. Only the elders in here remember the history of the Friendly Societies connected to Cup Match. Now we have 2 clubs. I will say this, in 15, 20 years, What has happened to the misplacement of memory of the friendly societies associated with Cup Match is going to happen to those two clubs. I can guarantee it. It's the same pattern being reproduced unless we save it. The intergenerational cultural transmission through families. That is probably one of the core attributes that we must bring to that event, to be about reconstructing cultural identity. I can say a lot more, but I'm going to be very fair and patient to the next speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Simmons. You can elaborate further in the Q&A session. Thank you. And now, Dr. Swan.
Greetings, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. I will be as brief as possible. I use this film in my classes many times. I think it's an excellent movie that allows a lot of discussion, and it's always interesting to see what my students get from the film because it's never the same. There's one thing that the film, in my opinion, doesn't highlight. It's the presence of approximately 200 million black people in South and Central Americas. We're talking Brazil, we're talking about 100 million. We're talking Venezuela, we're talking like 21 million. And Colombia and Ecuador, and those other kind of places. You watch World Cup, these black folks pop up, like in Costa Rica's team or Ecuador's team, as we saw. So we suffer from a certain level of invisibility. For me, I think that we have to make Paulo Camargo a household name in Bermuda. And in looking at this film, here's the connect that brings all of this together. Whether it's reparations, we know he was involved in working with indigenous communities, reparations, involved in Pan-Africanism. Here's a person who went to Africa, the Americas, Asia, Australia, working with black people from Bermuda soil. We have a revolutionary. We have the kind of person who has the energy that a lot of these black youth have today, but Paulo understood who his enemy was. And one thing that the film mentions is that there's slavery. But what's the connection between slavery and colonialism? In other words, what's the continued mechanisms of control that will perpetuate after slavery to keep black people in a form of enslavement? We're still a colony in Bermuda. And not just a political colony, but we're mentally colonized. I think most of us in this room know that. The key is how do we get that information to those who need it the most. My greatest success in teaching comes from when I put the medicine in the food. In other words, when I use cultural icons from the historical backgrounds of the folks I'm trying to reach to pass information through them. This brings us right back to Paulo. He needs to be a household name in the island. He fought against oppression. Many black youth are confused. And it's interesting because, you know, the system or the state will try, and when I say the state, I'm not even just talking about Bermuda's government. I'm talking about an entire network of collaborative control. We can call it NATO, we can call it white supremacist nations, we can call it the West, we can call it Babylon, but it's the same thing. They still exist. When I look at the tactics that were used to destroy black power in Bermuda through the propaganda by Britain's Information Research Department, I don't see those things having stopped in this society. Many times this control, or this oppression, it doesn't have an immediate effect, it has a generational effect. So you see the generational effect of students who were raised in a propaganda-laced education system in the 80s shows up in the 90s, and so on and so forth. So it's easy for us not to recognize that we're still being controlled by outside forces. It's easy for us to blame these youth and see these youth as somehow separate from the rest of the society. But they're not separate from the rest of the society. They're a symptom of the society that we're in. They're a symptom of the older generation in this society. So it's a collective issue that we have to face. One of the major issues also affecting blacks in Bermuda is an issue of identity, that we don't in our hearts see ourselves as being African. Actually, before we even get to that, we don't even really see ourselves as being West Indian, even though we may embrace gumbays, or we may embrace reggae, or we may eat codfish and potatoes and those kind of things. There's like a gap that prevents us from actually identifying because of how we've been socialized. And this is something serious. As Ms. Perman mentioned, we're not minorities. We're not minorities at all. people of color are the majority in this world, but we've been socialized to see ourselves as different. So this whole thing, this trend of trying to find this uniqueness of Bermuda, in my opinion, it can only take us to a certain point before it becomes counterproductive, because the issues that we face are not simply localized. They affect the entire African diaspora. So who are we? I mean, I saw the video on the website of the Department of Cultural Affairs where they ask people the question of what is Bermudian. Those are the folks that should see this video, in my opinion, because that's at the heart of the matter. When you cannot identify who you are, this is serious. You know, you can't disconnect identity from economics. They're connected. You can't talk politics about identity. They're connected because your identity is going to determine where you spend your money, or what you think is important, or what would you do with your money if black folks were given reparations, which I think is extremely important. As the film stated, I mean, or even reference Haiti. Haiti gave about $15 billion to France, for France to recognize its independence. What's the connection between Haiti and Bermuda? Oh, enough connections. I may not have the time to talk about them tonight, but if you read the works of Clarence Maxwell about Sally Bassett, he kind of connects some of those dots. A major issue affecting blacks in Bermuda is that at heart, and this is my opinion, we still have an essential belief that the system is okay. There's still something deep down that says the system is okay. There are just some problems in the system that have to be fixed. And the tiny problems, or have to be tweaked a little bit, is the youth. Just tweak the youth, maybe more basketball courts, maybe give them, a little more African education in the school system. It'll fix it. As if the system itself is fine. There's something fundamentally crazy about the society that we live in, but it's become so normalized. In other words, during the 60s and 70s, there was a fundamental critique of capitalism. But today it seems like capitalism has won. It's won. There's no fundamental critique anymore. The system just needs a little bit of tweaking. But somebody's been exploited for Bermuda to live these lives. It's the millions or billions of black people that we want to identify with. Their exploitation that allows us to be this place. It is. And it's kind of hard to realize. Or it's kind of tough to realize that, but without a fundamental critique of the system that we're in, the solutions that we present are only going to be token symptoms, because they're not going to fix the entire system. Case in point, you have a car. It has a hole in the oil pan, so it's leaking. You put more oil in it, it just leaks. You have to fix the structure of it. This system produces some type of population that's going to be exploited for the betterment of a few. It still remains and is not going anywhere until we actively change it from a revolutionary standpoint. But we're afraid to use those terms. Why? Because we've been socialized since the 60s and 70s to that any discussion of revolution, any discussion of a critique of capitalism is something that is, radical, crazy. We're gone beyond that. We should be far beyond that. Those things, that's an old type of thing to think about. Meanwhile, we're one of the few lasting colonies in the world. Quite ironic. Meanwhile, we're a developed society, but we don't produce, or we don't have our own hospital. Or not hospital, but our own four-year university, or those kind of things. But we're so developed. But I think I'll stop right there, because 2 minutes is probably done.
Thank you. What a wonderful discourse, ladies and gentlemen. Absolutely. And to briefly highlight what was said, and the persons who've just entered the room, Ms. Pearman spoke about we're not a minority, and that we need to take a step back. Education is more than a curriculum, the importance of the curriculum. There's a sense of hopelessness in our society, and that we need to do something about it. Dr. Simmons spoke on two central themes, one being the transportation of the 200 million Africans from Africa to the Western world. He also spoke about the 500 years later and how it's perceived. He cited that culture is a major issue which was addressed throughout the film, and that there were solutions provided for us. He went on to elaborate on 12 challenges for the African people, and that the current fight today is the fight for our young people's minds. And then Dr. Swan gave us an overview citing that there was a shortage, if you will, of the producers failing to show exactly the 200 million persons and where they've gone to. There's no representation of Bahia and South America, so to speak. He also spoke about Dr. Paulo Caramafigo being a household name, the importance of that. He, as well, elaborated on culture, the importance of it, and that the two central issues confronting us. One, the identity, our identity as Bermudians, and two, the system, our current system, the system of capitalism. It has not been questioned to that extent. That said, we have some roaming microphones. Please feel free to raise any questions, any concerns you may have about the presenters' viewpoints, or in fact, make a comment about the film you've seen. Don't be shy. This is our holiday season. We are discussing our emancipation. Dr. Simmons.
Good evening, everyone. Panel moderator.
Good.
Having viewed the movie, I think one of the themes that really spoke to me was identity. Dr. Swan mentioned Dr. Paulo Caramafigo. He was a mentor of mine as well as his, and it's always amazing to hear him talk about his travels, and it seemed like he was constantly interested in self-preservation, self-sustainability. So I'm wondering now, my question or comment regarding education in Bermuda. You just now mentioned Dr. Swan's book. I'm wondering, to what extent is that book being incorporated into school curricula so that young people know about it? I also have a friend, I think he's left, he's a scientist, his name is David Chapman. He's put together 2 or 3 books with 2 of his children called Daddy and I. I'm not sure because I don't teach, but are those books in the school system as well? In terms of identity, you talk about identity. Are we being identified in the curricula in any means? And are we using what we have, our national treasures, to speak for us instead of looking elsewhere?
Thank you. I will direct that question to the panel and allow Dr. Simmons to address it.
Yes, they are in the school system. We have a listing of all Bermuda books that are in our school libraries, associated with our literacy initiative. We target a few Bermuda books that we expect teachers to apply to learning for our students. In reference to Dr. Swan's book, in all sincerity, that's a book probably at the upper school level, of course, where you would expect for it to be used in a critical context. And I can tell you, it's there, but is it being used in that context? I doubt it. I don't think, I'm going to assume, I don't know what's happening at the college, but even at the college level, I would expect that text to be a text to be discussed just in the same way that we would discuss Dr. Paulo. This is a weakness of education in Bermuda. And when I use education, I think of it informally and formally. I'm not going to rely, never have relied on the formal educational institutions to inform my knowledge. And nor should anyone out there. We have to be about re-educating our people, and those books that you spoke to are books that should be discussed in clubs, churches, formal school, any forum that we have. So we have them, but the proper usage of them, and I'm going to say more so Dr. Swan's book, the proper usage of it, I would say is not being applied as it could be.
Sure.
To add to that, I would say a text like Nellie Mostyn's Money Onion Seed probably needs to be republished too, because that's a really worthy book. I'm sure the education system uses the autobiography of Mary Prince as well, but there's a number of other texts, I think, because so many of our scholars have just been, we have functioned like intellectual maroons, never really being accepted by the state, but it didn't mean that we didn't reproduce or produce knowledge. Some of those books just aren't as open to the public, particularly the youth, as they once were, and they kind of need to be.
Okay.
Can I just say something really quick? I don't know if this helps, but what I thought about is, in this day and age, not only are we dealing with books, but we're dealing with media.
Word.
And we keep talking about our young people and reaching them, and I would have thought that maybe some thought needs to be given. Maybe there's a bright spark in the room about presenting some of these works in a form that may be more accessible to them.
I mean, you raise a good point. If I may add to this here. You know, every year, school year, we have young people who produce, who write. And I just raised this with the language arts teachers and literature teachers. You know, our children should be publishing something every year. We got a lot of notoriety by the young lady at Victor Scott who wrote a little book because of the killings on that field. But we have many young people who write every year. But because we're not a culture that values reading, and we're not, we don't value writing, therefore we do not allow the creative expressions to be sustained with our children, much less our respected authors. They write and their books stay on the shelves. We don't use the multiple mediums of expression to have discussions and critiques around those books. How are we going to develop critical mindsets of our children if the adults themselves do not demonstrate the exercise of critical thinking? This is a cultural thing in this country where we need to begin to use the tools before us: media, radio, television, Facebook, internet, iPods.
Just let me interject, Dr. Simmons. I appreciate your comments. I know that there are a few other questions out there. Time is upon us, and I wanted to allow persons to raise their questions.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me disclose that I did work in the Ministry of Education, and I was very interested in the question raised by Max here about the use of materials by a country that does have a wealth of writers, thinkers, and the extent to which we use them effectively. Education is something that is taught, and behaviors expected as a result of that education need to be fostered constantly. We don't just teach it once and expect people to know it and then use it after the once that we teach it. My question becomes, with a country as small as ours, with a country as politically, on the one hand, what's the word I want? Grown up, knowledgeable as ours, with a level of expertise that we have, starting from the panel and looking at some of the young people that we have in the audience. What can be done, because I couldn't do it while I was in the Ministry of Education, what can be done to ensure that we use, highlight, point out for our young men particularly, because I think I heard someone say that this is all about capturing the minds of our young people, all of our young people. What does the panel see that we're not doing already that we must do in order to ensure that we come to expect the behavior that we want to expect from young people based on our, as adults, responsibilities for exhibiting that? I'm going to go a little bit further and say, there was a comment in the film about expecting the oppressor to teach us how to do what we must. I have a really great concern about when we have the oppressor's curriculum in our system and the expectation that we're going to have something different. We have as a curriculum the Cambridge curriculum. That's our choice. The expectation that we will have teachers who haven't learned how to use the resources of us already, to expect them to use them and integrate them in a curriculum that's already written for them, is a really big thing. And I don't think based on our experience and my experience in the system prior to my leaving, that we're going to have that. We have a rich resource of our own stuff. We have the books that were mentioned already. We have David's books. We have Dr. Hudson's books. We have Mr. Packwood's books. We have all kinds of resources that are about us, for us, by us, of us. If we haven't taught the teachers that we have, because we didn't do it 30 years ago, how to use us stuff, how do we expect present teachers to use us stuff? So the big question is, how do we expect adults to work in a way that we haven't taught them ourselves in terms of the us factor? We have so much stuff, but we don't do it. And we have the curriculum of the oppressor in our system.
Thank you, Ms. Axtell. Okay, panel?
I'm thinking I should probably sweep on that one and leave the substantive answer to the educators on the panel.
It has legal implications, so. But let me say that the interesting thing about how we arrived where we are with the current curriculum. Everyone, have you read the Bermuda First document? Have any of you read the Bermuda First document? You read the Bermuda? The rest of you don't know what the Bermuda First document is. Speaking to the economic future of this country. Yeah? In that document, a document that was produced before we start talking about the current adoption of this curriculum, it advocates for the international curriculum that we have in that document, right? You juxtapose that with the current blueprint that we're putting together, and let me say, that blueprint is really a blueprint of education reform for this country. Is it perfect? No. But it certainly warrants that all of us have a contributing role to play to shape and reshape the minds of all of our children. Now, with the curriculum, I'm one who, I don't get a fixation on any curriculum. There's only one curriculum that emanates out of your cultural way of life, right? And how do we do it? Well, we have enough technology that we talk about. We don't use it to our advantage, right? We have an over-reliance on cheap talk show radio, where much of the stuff is not energizing the minds critically of our people on serious issues, all right? Television, we have a CITV that plays reruns, but no constructive critique about some of the important discussion that's on there. Our people, our young people need to hear and see. Our teachers need to be a part of that process to learn. It's a learning experience. We are an anti-intellectual culture, so to have our teachers arrive at that point, it has to be a demonstrated behavior consistently using every multimedia that's available to us, using all of our human capital. One thing we do have is human capital. We produce human capital. India 30 years ago was exporting jewels. Their number one export is human capital. And they invested in it in math and sciences. And what are they doing? Exporting themselves to teach math, sciences to the rest of the world. Matter of fact, not only that, HSBC, the world's local bank, your bank, right? You miss a payment, you get a call from Mumbai, India. Sounds like it's right on Front Street. So, those are examples. Enculturation being reconstructed cultural identity. We have a great opportunity to do it. We have to be creative as a people in getting out there what we say we want for ourselves. We don't use the resources we have available to us to change a lot of the current behavior, as well as to teach and reteach.
Thank you, Dr. Simmons. Dr. Swan, you care to address?
Real quickly, I think that the education system of any nation should match the mission of that nation. What's the mission of Bermuda? And who's determining that mission? That's a fundamental question.
Read the Bermuda First document.
In addition to history, we have some other serious issues affecting the nation that needs to be collectively addressed inside the education system, like food security and sustainable development, which goes once again right back to Paulu. I'm going to keep saying it till I see it manifested. We need to really invest much more in researching his life and his works, and not just his works, but his philosophy, and using some of his philosophies in how we educate ourselves and how we live our lives. So if the mission of Bermuda was, okay, we have a serious issue with food security as the rest of the world, what's it going to look like in 5 years for us?
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I've been informed that we're not pressed for time. Okay, but we're going to roll on. And so I see a few hands up. Minister Scott.
Thanks, Dr. Tankard, and to your distinguished panel. So, the film plainly spoke to emancipation on the eve of our emancipation celebration. What agenda did the information in the film, what agenda did the information in the film suggest to us in the audience and to the panel? Speaking also to Dr. Swan's reference to the revolution necessary, what breakthroughs can we take from the information in the film to accelerate the agenda of a revolutionized approach that gets us to emancipation?
Thank you, Minister. Panel?
Well, I'll jump in. A number of things that I think have been mentioned. I think the first thing, once again, is we can keep coming back to this, is identity. And I think we need to really revolutionize how we see ourselves, because that's where it begins. So many scholars have mentioned in the past, I mean, folks like Marcus Garvey, if people don't know who they are, then how would they know where they're going? And those kind of things. And in the film, you saw a lot of symbolism of Sankofa, which in the Khan concept, it means one must go back to one's past to move forward. Yet we're being told that the past isn't important. So for me, a revolution begins in how we see ourselves. It begins in a certain mindset, because that's going to determine what is important to us. I think also, I don't think we really value what we have in Bermuda. And this is why it's important to connect ourselves to the diaspora. When we look at COPMES, there's something phenomenal that black people did in celebration of the emancipation of slavery. And when you match that with black folks across the entire world doing these same kind of things in celebration of emancipation, that's very significant. In other words, we have a contribution to make also to the wider black world of what black people did. But if COPMES is becoming commodified, as it is, if it becomes something that goes so far from the original mission, then there's something that we really have to be concerned about, because it was formed for a particular purpose. And we can't really forget that purpose. We can see black culture or black revolutionary ideas being commodified all across the world. You can see folks wearing Che Guevara shirts. You see all kind of folks wearing Bob Marley shirts who have nothing to really do with black consciousness in any extent, besides the fact that they wear apparel that appears to be from a certain, black political position. We have to really be concerned about that. And in Bermuda, I think one of the extensions of slavery and colonialism is consumerism. That's what we're addicted to. The saying I like to say is we like to be brand new, or supposed brand Nubians, so to speak. But we just want to be brand new. So we might want to be, politically conscious, but it's got to be brand new. It's got to be still hot, and that's a problem. That's a serious problem. And I hope I'm not getting too far from the question, and I'll stop.
Okay.
Wow.
Okay.
Can I just say?
I'm sorry.
Oh, there's a speaker that's been standing up for the longest time.
I see that, but do you care to?
Yeah, I just wanted to say
Sure.
briefly.
My question pertains to the SHAE program that was in operation a few years ago. In the middle school, introduced, let's just say this, Mrs. Van Putten, or was she Dr. Van Putten, had been one of the teachers who helped run the program. And myself being an educator, I was very much interested in learning about the program to see how it worked, because I knew it was set upon as a foundation for our black youth, especially to learn more about black history pertaining to the black diaspora. And my thing is, what's happened to it now? Why was it taken out of the middle school?
Thank you. The Ashe program, can anyone speak to that?
Yeah, I can speak to it. The Ashe program, unfortunately, let me just say, Delwood School was the targeted school for the Ashe. It was not in all of our middle schools originally. Unfortunately, through budget cuts, Ashe suffered some of that. There was also the opportunity put forward as a proposition. Nothing was stopping schools from applying it, but they would have to pay for Dr. Van Parten's fee. And unfortunately, you know, if you're already handcuffed financially, it's easy for principals and schools to say, well, you know, this is not going to work for us financially. They're going to deal with any budget. They're going to have that focus. There was also the opportunities to then, okay, let's align it with after-school programs, which are affiliated with a different ministry, but serving the same communities and children. This is a problem that we have also. There's no shortage of funding to operationalize things across ministries. There's just shortage of communication and commonality to arrive at the same goal. If folk don't see it as something as theirs, they don't place the value in supporting it financially. So all those opportunities or choices that we put out there for people to, okay, the funding and education budget is cut, but here are some other opportunities or avenues for which you can get the program in, still we're not exercised and taking advantage of. The great thing about it, we still have the blueprint. Nothing stops Ashe. And Van Putten knows this because she's discussed it herself as a good friend of mine. It can be instituted in churches, clubs, and any organization. She's left the blueprint. She's left teachers of it. Some may be here. Nothing stops them. Nothing stops you of presenting it in communities in a forum like this with some other creative entity. So in the formal essence in terms of the school, I see the value of Ashe across all schools, including private, but it's not going to happen there. And it's not going to happen in most of our schools because our people do not see it, unfortunately. Once we have left it to the decision of the leadership of certain schools, some don't see it. They don't see it also because their own religious views get in the way of the principles and practices of Ma'at. And they don't want to deal with the openness and discussion of that truth. They may see the benefit it's having for the students, but because it conflicts with their religious Christian values, they choose not to have it as a part of their program. That's the truth of the matter.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Simmons. There's a question here, yes.
I have yes, good evening to the panelists. I have a comment and a quick question. My particular interest is Bermudian identity, and Dr. Kitos want to mention that. And what I'm interested in and what the movie kind of brought out in it for me was about false representation was one of the things, and that we must recover our memory. So I want to know, how is the education system and the community and forms such as this helping us to move beyond our identity that's linked to colonization and slavery? How do we move beyond that? That's my question that I pose to all three of the panelists. Thank you.
I guess the last three questions have touched on young people and education, and I guess that's kind of where I am right now, except that I think we may be making a mistake. We may be making the mistake of looking at education for our young people when what we really need is education for us.
There you go.
That may be one of the primary issues, because if I'm charged with the responsibility of choosing which system we're going to use, or what's going to be in the curricula, or what books are going to be read, or God forbid, counseling students who are having difficulty, and I'm messed up myself. You know what I'm trying to say? And so I was reading a book by, I think her name is Dr. Leary, the post-traumatic slave syndrome. I don't know if you've seen that, right?
Yeah.
You remember that she starts off with the imagery of the mighty Maasai warriors who have fared all over the world. But in passing, in the group, their common saying is, "How are the children? How are the children?" And I'm thinking to myself as I sit in Bermuda, because I'm a nationalist too. I'm not global yet. I'm going to get there eventually. I'm still small. I want to see my rock fixed first before I go off trying to heal the world. But one of the issues that I have is, where are we when it comes to that? Aren't we so caught up in racing after somebody's mortgage and doing the second job and the third job, and trying to keep relationships and marriages and God, whatever, together? Are we so caught up in that we don't even have a chance to ask each other, how are the children? We're messed up. We're a disaster. And I'm not throwing rocks at anybody. I'm saying we. By the time most of us that, don't have the luxury of sitting off and playing tennis and aerobics and golf while our husband brings in the bacon, by the time we get home at the end of the day, my kid's lucky if he gets an hour of me, and he's even luckier if he gets an hour of me not screaming. So I mean, that's where my sense of frustration comes. On the one hand, I'm really, really excited about how it is that we've managed to maintain the society that we have, because with all the complaining, it's still a good place to live. And I don't want to go anywhere else. And I suspect that the people that complain very loud about us don't want to go anywhere else either, because they keep coming. Okay, so I love my island. This is it for me. I'm small and narrow-minded. But there's a part of me that's thinking, we're doing really well on one level, but on another level, when it comes to human relationships and how we're interacting with each other, we're talking about reading. And I'm saying, when is this reading supposed to happen? Because on one level, we look out there and see people as so unsophisticated and uncivilized, but, those so-called unsophisticated, uncivilized people have time for each other. They're not working 3 jobs. They don't have to make an appointment to do something with their kid on the weekend. So I guess I feel that we're at this very high level that we're talking about with the movie, this very high level, and we're still grappling with the basics. I can't educate my child if I don't have any time to talk to him about anything. I can't educate my child if I'm not in a position where I'm showing him anything. And so I hear what Ms. Esdell says, we've got all these great books, we've got these great thinkers, so what's happening with it? We're not transmitting it. Sometimes we transmit in different ways, we know that. Sometimes we transmit through chat. Sometimes we transmit through a nice lively argument around the bar. Sometimes we transmit on the field. So we don't always transmit like this. I get that. But all I'm saying is that, how are the children? If we're feeling all of this, And can I just say this about education too? Because I don't think that we have the luxury anymore of waiting for anybody to pick the right system or to put it in there or put in the program or we don't have that luxury. We have to collectively feel, well, we should feel desperate about it. I heard one word that I heard at least 3 times was complacency. You know, maybe it's time that we in Bermuda aren't so nice. Maybe we've got to act up a little bit. If your child can't read, it's not just the teacher's fault, your fault too. Right? It's not just about me sending the child to school and saying, what's the syllabus and what books are they, what am I doing? And what conversations am I having with the teacher? And what conversations am I having with the principal? And what conversations am I having with my government? Okay? I mean, I've seen cultures where people help, elders help children with homework and the elders can't read. You understand me? But they know the importance of what's going on here. We're not invested. It's everybody else's problem and responsibility besides ourselves. That's not emancipation. That's slavery.
It's the issue we're addressing. Dr. Simmons and Dr. Swan, did either of you care to address the question?
I think my sister articulated that so well.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Next question, I see. Is it Mr. Champion?
Evening, everybody. There's so many places I could go, but I'm not gonna try to get all the areas done. But one of the things I wanted to talk about was kind of bring it back to the film, because I didn't realize I was at an education forum, but that probably slipped across me when I read the pamphlet.
It's all education.
Yeah.
There's no shortage of education.
But that's the point.
Yeah.
There's a difference between one person's interpretation of the meaning of education, as Ms. Pyramid said with the big E, and others who most of the time are talking about the small e. So it's really not all education if you're talking about different things. But move past that for a second. I was talking to my friend Mike Perriman, and then my sister Latoya, and then my brother Fernand, who were kind of all in my age group. I didn't get a chance to talk to Kito about it because he is obviously more important than us, so he's up on the stage. Just joking, Kito. Just joking. Just a little humor. But I was talking about the film to the brothers and sisters, saying that for me, I found the film to be quite basic. And I didn't want to, be hard about it, but I was just trying to give my, as Dr. Simmons said, critique it, not just accept it. I found it to be quite basic. And in the sense that it was a long film, it was very broad, and there was lots of music. And I think that possibly if he took out some of the music, shortened it up, and got a little deeper on the topics, it probably could have been a lot more in-depth, especially for the type of audience that we have in Bermuda. And my point to all of this is that I remember in Berkeley, my peers would remember this well, that first of all, Roots came on as a mini-series for the whole of Bermuda. I don't know if you remember that, right? And in Berkeley, we went to watch Cry Freedom, right, in this very theater. So this film, for me, was like something we would watch in high school, like Cry Freedom. It was, in fact, Cry Freedom, to me, seemed probably more of a learning experience than possibly this film. You could get a lot more from it. And I think that in Bermuda, that we are quite advanced, but we don't necessarily recognize how advanced we are. For me, this film, being resident now in the UK, would be something more appropriate for a UK audience. And I was talking to Sister Latoya about that, some of her background is from the US. Because in the in the UK, they're not as advanced for people of color in terms of achievement and empowerment and so on, for the broad spectrum of people as they are in the UK. So Sister Toya had said that the US has a lot of tokenism. You have Barack Obama, but in a lot of ways he's seen as a token. So on, I said, well, at least they have tokenism. Whereas in the UK, you don't even have tokenism. You don't have that black presenter. You don't have that black sports hero, so on and so on. So to cut it short, basically, I think that sometimes we underestimate how much we really have, and I think Ms. Pyramid's kind of saying that, how much we really have here in Bermuda. The fact that we're in the Union having this discussion, we're watching a film on emancipation, we're having Cup Match this week. I mean, it's almost overload when you think about it. We have 3 eminent speakers who are talking about, I would dare you to find even a month of searching in the UK and find just one event like that. I'm going to sum it up in this way. My son, who lives in the UK with me, is now back here in Bermuda. He's in UK. He goes to primary school. He catches the bus by himself. He has access to YouTube and internet. He does all of that by himself. He has all of those trappings that we want the average youth to get here in Bermuda. But the greatest teaching my son gets is demonstrated, for example, from what I saw him today. He goes camping with his uncle, and his uncle sends him, who is 11, his cousin, who is also 11, and his nephew, his other cousin, who is 14, all fishing, all by themselves. And those boys fish all day, and they catch their own fish, come back home, clean it, cook it, so on. They might not have read a textbook on nuclear physics and so on and so on, but the advancement for our boys compared to the average boy in the UK is far, far greater in terms of their emancipation. And I'll stop right there because I don't want to get too deep with it.
Well, if I may, as an educator, I think sometimes the most basic things are the most effective tools. Just like a mason who sometimes may use a basic hammer for a particular tool or a particular task. It depends on the task. I think if you look deeper at this film, though, there's a lot of significant concepts that come out. For example, the impression that Africans, or the notion that Africans did not resist slavery in Africa. Mm-hmm. That's an important piece. To show that Africans resisted slavery in Africa, that's extremely significant. For me, to show students in a U.S. context, black folks with a supposed British accent talking about racism is a revelation. Because the media projects an image of black folks in the UK, they have just the opposite, as you mentioned. They think that black folks in the UK are doing all right. You know, no racism, everything's all right. And this also makes it important for me to not just see myself as a black person in Bermuda, because I think when we study or the experiences of black folks across the world, we can learn from these different experiences and even help understand ourselves better. For example, when we talk about St. David's, wow, St. David's, black folks mixed with the Pequot. Such a unique phenomenon. Not really. If you look at black folks across the Americas, you see black people intermixing with indigenous communities all across the Americas and maroon communities. So that uniqueness is still contextualized in a larger phenomenon. So, but if you don't get that, you just think, oh, this is just something that we do. No, it's bigger than that. Even some of the language patterns that we use. You know, look at the diet that we have. Yeah, in many ways it's West Indian, you know, that coverage and potatoes, that basic kind of slave food that many communities still have, flour, water, sugar or salt, might be Johnny bread. Some folks might call it Johnny cake. Some folks might call it dumplings. Still the same kind of process. So where did macaroni and cheese come from, though? How'd that get in that little mix? Barbecue chicken. That's like a U.S. Southern phenomenon of U.S. South black people. And if you look historically at the connection between blacks in the British West Indies and places like South Carolina, we see the same kind of folks. Mm-hmm. But to go back to what you said, I think the film also shows that black folks have had a tradition of resistance, which is really important, because when you think of Bermuda specifically, you don't think of black people many times as folks resisting. It's almost like resistance is like this, you know, that's the exception to the rule. Every now and then, black person pops up that fights against the system. But I think that's been a consistent for black people. And if black people are advanced in a certain space, which I think is debatable, it's because we fought to get the so-called material things that we've had. I mean, it's not always comfortable to talk about, but we have to really analyze what were the social concessions that were given to black people after the assassinations of the British police commissioner and governor in the 1970s. And what was the impact of that? Because from my perspective, it looks like that's what it took. for the government, the UBP, to make these kind of concessions. If you look at British intelligence documents, they actually confirm that as well. They actually suggested independence maybe as a mechanism for destroying black militancy, but the UBP opted a different route. These things, in my opinion, are really significant, and I think I'll stop right there.
But it's symbols, signs, and what they call semiotics. I mean, to me, again, when I broke it down analytically, interpretively, normatively, there are other components of that analysis that you add to it. And it's very important that we teach our children to understand, in looking at that film, you may hear, different dialects, language, but you got to teach them to read the symbols and signs, the multiple meanings, all right? The semiotics, the signifiers they may call. For example, in the rhythms. I mean, for me, in looking at the film, for example, if I wanted to just focus on, the variation of dance patterns, that were viewed on the film. Movement. People of African descent, movement, right? The comparisons, the relationships, speaking to our relationship, just in movement. I mean, I was looking at it in that context. And we have to teach our children the same thing. When they listen to our politicians, for example, just listen to a debate in the House. And if you don't know them, but just you're listening to the voices and teaching our children diction and associating it with the characters on the other side. You hear the name, well, you hear the different rhythm of a Brown versus a Dunkley. You can go teaching our children rhythm. Very important. Understanding that, well, you sound like an American. But I use accent as cultural currency. I use my Bermudian accent as cultural currency, depending on where I am. It's cultural currency to me. And teaching our children how to use that to decode cultural currency, language, speech, accent. So if you get off into a little bit of patois, and you could do that, it has some currency in some context, how you choose to use it. So we teach our children these things, when and when not to. And you know what? Very basic. I don't know about all, but I know as a student, very fundamental. Very fundamental. When we did not speak in a grammatically correct way, we were corrected.
Okay. Let's take another question if I can, Dr. Simmons.
Decoding.
I see that there are hands out there. Someone in front. Okay.
Good evening. First of all, I'd like to applaud our panelists. It's really been refreshing just to hear their articulations throughout the evening. And my greatest disappointment, I think, is that in order to indoctrinate a different mindset within our community, it has to become rudimental and continuous. And what I think is most disturbing about these types of settings is they're long in terms of the content and information we're taking in, but they're brief in terms of the time spent on them overall. Just like to refer to a few notes that I have made while sitting here throughout the evening. And one of the things that came to my attention in listening to all of the speakers was that it seems to us that as a society so small, so strong yet so weak, that we're willing to spend more to incarcerate than to educate. And I'm disturbed how we would reach that point in a community of 60,000, a fraction in any other part of the world, and yet so little emphasis seems to be placed on motivating and educating and facilitating particularly our people, more specifically our black males, in a way that eventually, us as a community can be strengthened through developing them as greater human resources. There was a point that was made, I think, by the Dr. Simmons, and the way that I summed it up was that in order for us to change our future, we have to look at the status of our identity, our politics, and our economics. What I find most disturbing about our community right now is, irrespective of political figureheads, change of administration, etc., we still seem to remain stagnated when we put those three elements together. And I guess my question to the panelists, and I'm sure all three of you can respond, is what can we do as a people, to, I guess, at this point, assist our leadership? Because, here we are in 2010, and from what I can tell, it seems as though, as a society, we're progressing regressively, quickly, than moving forward. I know that we speak on education and things of this nature, technology, etc., but what do those things mean if, as a community, we're not socially and economically stable? If you can speak to that, I would certainly appreciate it. And I'd like to close up by this point. The Premier made a point when he opened up. He said, to fix a problem, you must come to terms with the problem. If you can speak to that collectively, I'd appreciate it.
I'm going to give those three. Politics is the management of your economics, or your economics. Culture is what holds it together. And we keep coming back to that C word. Politically, we have stability. We're a politically stable country. Economically, we speak to our affluency as a country compared to other nations. I think Keto spoke to, I think you spoke to it. Culturally, that's our handicap. We're bankrupt. It keeps coming back to us questioning the identity issue. Keeps coming back to that. So the answer, what do we do? Again, our solutions are with us. What are we prepared to do? Yes, where we are, but what are we prepared to do collectively with the resources and the tools before us? Yes, to hold political representation before us accountable. And let me just say this here, change the moral precision of many politicians, you'll change the moral compass of your country. Yes, and others may debate that and say, no, find God, stick to the commandments, and everything be all right. Well, that hasn't been proven to work for us. So it has to be a holistic thing. But given that politics is the management of your economics and culture is what holds it together, and we have been debating and discussing this and finding out, keeps going back to culture.
Let's hear from the other two panelists, if we will, with respect to the question and how we're going to move forward with those issues.
Yeah, I think that the question is really challenging, because you say, what are we going to do? And, I hate to be the gloom and doom one tonight, but we're still working on we. We're still working on what we are, let alone what we're going to do, because on one level, we have this sense that we're Bermudian and we're proud, and, the plane flies over, we see the turquoise water, and everybody goes, ooh, and we're happy and excited about the cup match and the red and the blue, all of that. We got all of that. But what's we? Because we cannot escape from history. And Palu was a teacher of mine as well, Keto. And that was the legacy he left for me. Scientists, when they want to find out what's going to work and what's safe and what's not going to kill you, they try it out in a lab. But for social sciences, there is no lab. The only thing we have is history. We can look back and say, oh, we tried that before and look what it blew up in our face. Or we tried this before and it strengthened us. That's what we have to use now. That's all we've got. And when I look at my beloved Bermuda and issues around we make me nervous, because I don't know if it's because we were little and maybe because we didn't have enough plantations, and so Mr. Trimmingham had 3 over here and Mr. Cooper had 10 over there and Mr. Outerbridge had 15. I don't know if that hurt us, but the we is missing. When I'm in trouble, there's no we. When my son gets out of prison and needs a job, there's no we. Understand me? So one of the issues that we've got to address in identity and culture and all of that is to look, yes, backwards, even though that may sound old-fashioned. We've got to look backwards, even though we can't go backwards, for some answers. And to me, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to balance that with where we are today. And I have a son, he's 8. And I worry for him. Because those days when there was a neighborhood and somebody could teach him how to make a kite or, watch over him and make sure he didn't do stupid, that's done. I don't even know who my neighbors are. So that's part of the thing that we've got to work on. You said something about incarceration. That's something that I've talked to you about for a million years. But when the Progressive Labor Party government came into power, one of the things it had to be charged with doing, was finding ways that we could avoid decriminalizing people. Because our history and our legacy was that of criminalizing people of African descent. And so you had alternatives to incarceration. You had, how can we avoid this revolving door? Now, today, you're hearing people say, that didn't work. That was dreadful. That caused the whole problem. The reality of the situation is that we still in this country lock up people for crazy things. It's still an offense in Bermuda to be wandering abroad. You wonder where that came from. Not being able to give any good account of yourself. What's that about? So, and even with the so-called change in policy and mentality, the reality of the situation is, I think Westgate holds 210.
300 plus now.
Okay, and I'll throw another statistic at you. I would be amazed, I would be shocked if 4 of them were white. Exactly. So what's we? That's part of the discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Freeman. Dr. Swan, care to address?
Well, just to jump onto that, the film highlighted how in the United States about 40% of folks incarcerated in U.S. prisons are African American. It's actually like 50% now. And a major issue that was seen is this prison industrial complex, where black folks are being arrested at tremendous rates. And that's, United States incarcerates more people than any other society in the world. And I think that's a phenomenon that's going to affect not just the United States, but also societies underneath U.S. control or political control, which includes Bermuda. It's something that we really have to be mindful of, the privatization of prison systems, which is a major issue affecting so many black people, and Obama refuses to address it. Just dropped it off there.
Okay, thank you. I see 2 more questions out there.
Yes, thank you. I want to commend the department for the film and for our panelists. I thought it was an excellent film. The symbols, as Dr. Simmons was speaking to, it's a very powerful teaching element, especially showing that young man transitioning from holding a gun to having a graduation. And so it was a lot of imagery. It had with a lot of stuff, even in, and sometimes you have to have those pauses so that something profound can kind of sink in. However, I did note that the movie was very big on some of the nationalism, like a lot of Garvey, a lot of Malcolm X, not really any W.E.B. Du Bois or Martin King. I can understand the movie is trying to stress a point, but it comes back to some of the divisions or the conflict in ideologies and religion. And when the Ashe program was mentioned, something was said about how some, perhaps maybe in the Christian community, did not embrace that. And I know that around Christmas time, when we talk about, because the Kwanzaa and the founder was on, very prominent in the film. You know, there's some resistance to that because it's not seen as being Christian-based, but all those principles. And what's come over, second principle of Kwanzaa is Kuji, not the second one, but one of the prominent ones, is Kuji Shagalia, to name yourself, define yourself. Because if you don't define who you are, and a lot of what has been said comes back to this whole sense of identity. So the question always comes back to me, as Ms. Perman was saying, and others have quoted the we question, who are we, question of identity, is to what degree is this colonialistic project or patriarchy, the legacy of patriarchy, still very much prominent today. I got something with the, what was it, the Nubian, what was that word? Brand Nubian, yeah, I'm gonna use that, Brand Nubian. Because it seems as though if we don't identify not only what happened, but talk about the post-traumatic slavery syndrome, what is the legacy of the colonial project that we're still fighting against? And what way are we self-perpetuating that? I think of Frantz Fanon, who talks about in The Wretched of the Earth, how those who are oppressed desire what the oppressor has to live where the oppressor lives, and he goes on and goes kind of wild with it anyway. But it seems as though if we do not see how we are part of the continuation of our own kind of enslavement, then we're missing it. So I guess my fundamental question is, some of it has been identified, but what are the principal mechanisms that we ourselves may be perpetuating in this colonial project?
Okay, thank you. Briefly, panelists?
Briefly, this is a society of taboo, and we're hypocritically a taboo society. I'm just going to say, and I've had this discussion with your legal partners, Larry, Scott, and my brother's a lawyer by profession, and I said, you know, Bermuda's a very much a taboo society. A lot of intergenerational, interrelational, you know, incestuous relationships run through Bermuda. And we may be suffering some of the repercussions of that even in the behavior we see in our children. We've gone years denying relatives on the transgressions of fathers and mothers of the past. We don't have that discussion in Bermuda. We walk by it every day. Every day. I got relatives of mine who will not acknowledge because of the sins of the grandfather. Wouldn't acknowledge my mother. We have a lot of that in Bermuda. Let's have that discussion before we go back to Africa.
Okay, thank you. Whoa.
Oh dear. Wow.
Okay.
Can I just say something?
Sure,
brief?
sure.
I think hypocrisy is an important thing, but I think it's almost to be expected when you're dealing with people who have to survive trauma. Some things are just too deep to deal with without, you know, serious therapy and all of that. We haven't even touched on reconciliation. That's a subject in itself. But it's about healing first, I think. It's about healing self. And I believe that moving forward, one of the things I would like to see us embrace is, I would like to see us embrace the pain that we've endured. And I know that's really old-fashioned, because if you talk to a 25-year-old, they're like, what pain? I didn't have any. What pain did I have? I don't have any pain. But this society remains, even though it's small and it punches above its weight, this society, I think Palu, now you're going to make me talk about him all night, he used to say that the people of Bermuda should have been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize because of the stuff that we took around here and didn't do nothing to nobody about it.
Right.
We just took it. And that may be where I was going when I said maybe it's time we stop being so nice. Maybe time we got to start acting up a little bit around here and banging our fist and making our case for ourselves. But I'd like to see us acknowledge the fact that this has not been any easy existence and experience for us, but at the same time to try and encourage and empower each other, again, using history to say that, you know, we can go forward. I'd also like to, I really, really would like for us to get to a point where we're not afraid to put on the table that we've got this inferiority thing going on. We really do have to deal with this. I don't know how it's going to be done. Maybe we've got to, you know, just raise some specialists in Bermudian inferiority complex. I don't know. But that's something that I'd like to see, because there's no healing without that. Reconciliation, I'm not interested anymore, and I really do apologize. I don't mean to offend. I'm not interested anymore in whether white people can come and talk to black people and we can all sit and you know, as a good friend of mine says, sing Kumbaya. I'm not interested in that anymore. Not because I don't feel that they are part of me, but I don't think it's my role to go get them. I think it's my role now to deal with the scars that have been done to me, because we spend too much time in this country trying to make the white people not scared and nervous and feel better, and not show that, you know, we really don't want any trouble, we don't hate you, we love. We spend too much time on that. They've got to fix that part for themselves. I want us to be able to fix we, and the first part of that comes from acknowledging what's happened to us, the fact that we've been through trauma, the fact that, you know, we had this wonderful hotel system where, you know, your husband punched the stuffings out of you, but you had to go and smile for the tourists. I mean, you know, we've got issues. Let's acknowledge that. Let's acknowledge that in our consideration of emancipation and freedom. Let's not be the lizard.
Very good. Dr. Swan, did you care to comment?
I was going to say, similar to what Ms. Perman said, is that whiteness has a social currency added to it. We've had debates about, is race real? Whiteness is real because from the society is defined as being real. So there's like a currency that comes with it, which is why we feel like this need to make white folks feel comfortable. And I think that, to go back to the question that the brother raised, I think black folks need to devalue whiteness in this society. What I mean by that is to stop operating like there's this white boogeyman that's going to put you in chains and lynch you if you speak about racism, or if you're honest about what's really happening to black people. We need to devalue that. Slavery, true indeed, created a master complex in white folks that have it, but that's not our hang-up, you know? That's their hang-up. Stokely Carmichael once said that black people didn't need a civil rights bill. He said that white folks need a civil rights bill. Because as a black person, he knew he could go anywhere he wanted to go. White folks need a civil rights bill so they could learn that he could go wherever he wanted to go. And that's the position that we should take. I agree 100%. We have to do it for ourselves. We change ourselves, and we're going to transform the reality around us. And that's colonialism. That's a colonial mentality that we're stuck with. You can't really separate colonialism from racism, or slavery, for that matter.
Very good. Okay, I think we have one more question, and then we will wrap it up.
I think it's a little appropriate that I speak at this time. I am from the United States. I've been married to a Bermudian for 28 years. I love Bermuda, and I have seen from the outside in, as a former college professor and state official in the health field, that you have so much golden opportunities here that I have been amazed that some of the things that you're talking about now have not been addressed in reference to healing yourselves. Just from the experience that I've had, my mother, my grandmother, and I were in the front row when Dr. King gave his dream speech. That was something that helped me to find my identity, because I went to an all-white school throughout my whole education, and it forced me to see that I was something different from what white people were telling me that I was. So when I went back from the speech in Washington, I asked, how can I get out of this school? So I graduated. I skipped my senior year of high school and went to Hampton University, which was Hampton Institute at the time, to find my black roots, which is what helped me to free myself. Even though I partied my way back home, it helped me to see who I was in the midst of where I had come from and where they were trying to make me go or not go. And I think that what I've seen over the 28 years that I've known about Bermuda, which is odd also that Bermuda is not recognized for the value that it is among black people in the United States. You have a culture here that is so strong that I think that with the learning of the history and the combination of history and social sciences together to do that healing, Asa Hilliard was a colleague of mine. What helped me to also be healed was attending the annual Black Psychologists Convention. They broke away from the American Psychological Association to form their own group, which is a part of what you're talking about now, to be able to find out who we were. And the scholars like Asa Hilliard, Naeem Akbar, all of the scholars who have become prominent, and some have died without their information becoming a reality to most people. This is a time that you can grasp that energy and that education that they had to share and bring it to Bermuda, because one of the problems that you have here is that you're isolated. Your isolation could have caused some of your downfall. And I think that as a mother of two half Bermudian sons, and I want them to know what their culture is here as well, that I am embracing Bermuda. I love Bermuda. I'm retired from the United States, and I'm here to do whatever I can to contribute to whatever I can provide for you here. And also I'm learning from you as well. So there are so many things that you can do that you're looking for, and you have your hands on it. But that healing has to come from history and your psychological healing and sociological healing as well, to get you to a point where you're stable and secure and not isolated, because you can be the center of the world as far as black people are concerned. And I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. Okay, we have one more question back there before we wrap up.
Last one.
Last question.
How ironic. I'm from the States as well.
Okay.
And in fact, I'm from what you call the Black Belt South. I was from Greensboro, North Carolina, where the A&T sit-ins happened. The first Woolworths was desegregated. The students sat in. My thing here, I've been in Bermuda for a while, a long time, 20 years. I think this whole issue of identity, to me, that is like a key element of some of the issues I see here. Because a lot of times, when I look at young people, and we need to talk about the young people, a lot of them, they talk like Jamaicans or West Indians, they dress like Americans. Some, they identify with other people, other places other than Bermuda. And the only time that they really get into the so-called Bermudian spirit is around this time of year. And I would think that the film tonight, which I have myself, I would think that it'd be good to just, how does have those movies down
on the beach,
on Front Street, and movies on the beach? They should show these movies. They should show post-traumatic stress syndrome. They should show, 500 years later. And I think you have to take it to the people. and take it to the young people, because they're not going to come to you. I had some flyers made up. In fact, I've got some tonight, just in case. The sagging, and I passed these out at the May 24 parade, and a lot of young people took them. A lot of them rejected it, but their parents took them. But it talks about what sagging is about and where it came from, you know, the whole prison mentality. I think you have to just talk to young people. You have to talk to people who don't know. I work in mental health. I agree with what you were saying. Bermuda has a very, very small gene pool, and the fact that sometimes we see some of these behaviors come from that fact. You know, there's a small community, and that mental illness or whatever runs through a lot of families, and a lot of times we see young people acting out, and it doesn't help when they use substances. You know, that makes it even worse. But the job that I'm in, I talk to a lot of young people. I talk to people I work with, and I just tell them, you know, what about Sally Bassett? I pulled that up on the internet at work. And a young lady who I work with, who's probably 35, said Sally Bassett she was burned at the stake because she was practicing witchcraft. And I said, let's go further and see some other information about Sally Bassett. Do you know Sally Bassett is on the Academy grounds? Oh, I saw something standing out there, but I didn't know what it was. Cool. You know, so I think we have to confront people straight up. If you don't know, you don't know. But if you have the information, pass it on. And that's how I think you're going to bring older people and younger people around. You have to confront it. But I would like to see these films played out in the public.
Okay, thank you. With that said, let's wrap it up and say that we've been very appreciative for our panel who've provided us with substantive responses, their analysis of the movie, something to consider. As we move forward, where do we go from here? Obviously, there is a desire, a cry for us in Bermuda to search our identity, to let the healing begin. We need to find a way to make it happen. We need to communicate. We need to educate, continue to educate. This is our charge, our challenge. And so with that said, I want to thank the panel, but before we move any further, I think, is Ms. Whalen's going to wrap up, and congratulations. Thank you. Ms. Heather Whalen, the Senior Cultural Affairs Officer for the Department of Community and Cultural Affairs. Ms. Whalen.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Tankard. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, audience. I think Dr. Tankard wrapped it up really nicely. We've had meaningful, powerful discussion, and where do we go from here? One of the things that we want to continue as the department is to continue with sensitizing people about the issues around our cultural heritage, be it from the lens of emancipation or a different one. We want to use this kind of forum to generate discussion. So we thank you for being here. I'd like to thank the panel once again. They did a fantastic job. I would like to thank and thank our moderator who helped to move things along. And thank you, because without you here, present and participating, we would not have had such a rich discourse. Thank you very much. And as we move out, let's remember that each of us has a responsibility to reach and to teach. Thank you. Take care. Safe travel home. Bye-bye.
Thanks. That was great.
That was actually good. You're making me think about Balu. That's the teacher.